We've had a couple of questions asking when you should stop giving. How do you decide when you've given enough? Is it hard to justify unnecessary purchases? So could you comment on that?
Yeah, well, that's, you started off with one of the really tough questions, because there is no line. In a way, the only line is, as I said in the original Famine, Affluence and Morality article, when you're giving so much that if you would give more, you would be causing yourself as much harm as you'd be preventing to the person who's receiving the benefit. That's the only kind of really logical stopping place, and it's, of course, extremely demanding place, and I say that I give at level myself. So I suppose what I do is I give to the point where I feel both satisfied that I'm making an important difference, and also that I can do this sustainably, that this is something that I'm comfortable with and can do year after year, or even hopefully edge up year after year with what I'm doing. I keep going on to the point at which I guess it starts to feel things become a bit of a strain. But that's a decision. That line is something that every individual has to make for themselves. And I would say start with something that you're confident enough about being able to do, and then try to do more the next time you give, or giving monthly or annually, whatever. Build up a little bit of time, see what you get.
Great. So we've got a question from Eugene, which says, what would you consider an objective criteria for utility? So I should point out that utility in this case is sort of referring to goodness, if you like. And is it purely a matter of number of lives?
No, it's certainly not just a matter of number of lives, because the quality of lives matters as well. In general, when the classical utilitarians talked about utility, they meant happiness and the avoidance of misery, or pleasure and the avoidance of pain. So those are the kinds of things that we've got to take into account. Of course, immediately then you've got a way of saying, well, can you compare charities which save lives with charities that reduce suffering in some way? And that's difficult to do, although healthcare economists try to do that. They have developed units called the quality adjusted life year, which is adding a year of life to someone and then trying to adjust it for its quality. And that's it. In fact, your National Health Service is using indicators that decide interventions are worth funding and which are not. It's a general problem. It's wider than effective altruism. But those are the kinds of things that I think you ought to look at. The quality of life, saving lives, especially saving lives that otherwise would end very prematurely.
Great. So you've sort of focused on your answer there on things related to, you mentioned the disability adjusted life year, a sort of generally used for sort of health outcomes. But we've got a question about how we might, as individuals, solve the refugee crisis. And this links into sort of ideas more of systemic change as opposed to, getting more DALYs, this disability adjusted life year for your money. So could you touch on general systemic change issues, but also the refugee crisis in particular?
Yes, but I don't think it's a question of systemic change versus getting more disability adjusted life years for your money. I think it's a question of how do you get more, whatever the good is, right? If it's DALYs or happiness or life saved, whatever goods you think are important, how do you get more of them in the long run? Because surely systemic change is not important for its own sake. It's only important if it actually provides people with better lives in the long run. And then the other factor that you have to take into account when you're considering attempting to bring about systemic change is that what are the odds against your succeeding? Because if you donate money to an established charity against Malaria Foundation, your only going to save a small number of lives, depending on how much you can give, but if you're not extremely wealthy, you're only going to be saving a small number of lives. But there's a very high probability that you will be saving those lives. Quite a certainty, if something can go wrong in any human affairs, but a very high probability. Whereas if you say, I want to bring about systemic change so that we don't have some of these larger problems, but the problem is extreme poverty in the world, or since you mentioned it, the refugee crisis, then you have to say, so what are the chances that anything that I could possibly do will make any difference to the success of efforts to bring about that kind of systemic change? And if the answer is there's no chance that I can make a difference, then you shouldn't do it. There's no point, in my view anyway, in making nice gestures. What we want to do is to make people better off. It's sometimes worth attempting to solve a big problem if there is some chance, some probability that will contribute to a successful solution to those problems. And even if it's quite a small chance, if the problem is a very big one, then it's worth doing. That's what is often called expected utility, the amount of utility you'll get if you succeed, divided by the odds against your success. So, in terms of the refugee crisis, that's such a big problem and it's such a multifactorial problem that I don't actually think there's anything that we can do that is going to solve the whole problem. You can certainly solve bits of the problem, but even solving bits of the problem is extremely difficult. Let's say we take a part of the problem that is the civil war in Syria, which is what factor refugee flow to Europe. It's certainly not the only one, and a lot of refugees coming from other parts of the world as well, including Saharan Africa. But if you take that problem, then how are you going to contribute to that? Well, you have to think what you want done. I mean, some people think, let's say, here in the United States, it could apply to any NATO power. Some people think that there ought to be military intervention to get rid of Assad and to bring about an end to the war. Well, that might have been feasible a few years ago, but now that you have the Russians involved backing Assad, that starts to look like an extremely risky strategy. Who knows where that would go if you imagine NATO planes in the air against Russian planes, and what's going to happen after that. But it was always actually pretty difficult because who was NATO or the United States going to back on the ground? There are various groups opposed to Assad, including, of course, ISIS. We don't want to back them. What about the other groups? Some people argue that as soon as the West comes in supporting that group is immediately discredited in Syria. So it's really hard to know, I think, you could do in that situation. Then the rest of the refugee problem, a part of that, I suppose, is related to extreme poverty in sub-Saharan Africa, perhaps, and in some other countries as well. Another part of it may be related to climate change, which is causing problems and will cause worse problems in years to come. There are things you can do to lessen those problems, but again, if you're thinking about trying to relieve global poverty, then you'll get back to those organisations that are doing that. So, in a way, if you need to say more precisely what the strategy is that you think is worth following and backing, and then that strategy needs to be assessed and needs to be seen whether you're actually going to succeed in overcoming that problem.
Great. So you've said, that we can do both things together. We can donate to charity as well as, perhaps campaign for things that we want to see changed. But that perhaps sort of systemic change things are just a riskier option. I think it's worth pointing out that there are groups like the Open Philanthropy Project out of GiveWell that are trying to answer some of these really difficult questions about certain types of reform that we might like to see as a society. There's another question sort of related to this, which touches on the idea, I guess, of earning to give, which was mentioned in your TED Talk. Peter's asked, if people who give 10% earn that 10% via an institution that has significant negative impacts on people, then how effective is their altruism?
Well, yes, I mean, it depends. I think you kind of asked whether them leaving the institution would make any difference to it, whether they're actually supporting it in some way, or whether they get that fake job not completely relevant. So, let's say you now get a job at some institution which is causing harm to people, right? You can think of whatever institution it is that is causing harm to people. I'm not going to assume that every career in that earns a high income is harming people, but some of them do. So I think if you decide not to take that job, someone else will take the job, and very likely, given what's typical of people who get high-paid jobs, they won't give any significant part of their income to affected charities. So, will the result be any better, or will it simply be worse because there is less money going to affected charities? The other, apart from the money going to the charities, you might consider how likely are we to change these institutions for the better if people with a conscience refuse to go working? Maybe in some cases we can bring about change from the inside. Not always. Maybe too resistant. But if you give it a try, if you go and work there for a year or two, let's say you do decide that the company you're working for is causing harm, you just change your management, and let's say that it's largely but making profits, aren't we? There might be a point at which you want to leave. That's a reasonable decision. You can't possibly work and live working with a company like that. But now you'll have been on the inside, and you'll be in a much better position to tell other people, maybe even to write for media, talk to the media about what this company is doing and why it shouldn't be allowed to do it. And maybe you can start a movement for legislation to stop this company from doing that. So I'm always, as you gather, I'm always thinking about the consequences of your actions. I'm not really, in this case, thinking about are my hands clean? Am I in some way tainted because I'm working for a company and getting my income from a company that's doing bad things? I'm much more likely to think about how can I the best outcome from this, and what is that going to involve? And maybe just never working there in the first place, or resigning without saying why I'm resigning and just walking away, are not the best thing to do. There may be things that will have better consequences either of those options.
Thanks. Just a pause. How's the sound quality? Because is it okay? Has it got better?
Are you talking to the audience?
I was talking to the audience, but how is it for you, Peter?
I'm getting something that's not a serious enough. I can certainly hear you.
Okay. Well, you're dealing with the echo very well, so we're happy to carry on. I think so. Okay. So the top question at the moment is sort of moving on to animals, and it's asking, do you think veganism is one of the most effective forms of altruism?
I think it can be, yes. I certainly think that it's beneficial in terms of reducing the number of animals who suffer, plus, of course, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and setting an example to others to show that a diet that you can keep to, that you can remain healthy on, fit and active, and so on, and therefore that there's no need to be meat or other animal product. I think that it is important to think about the effect you're having on others, again, not just what am I doing. And I do sometimes worry that some vegans, it's not true of all of them, are a little too puristic to have the greatest possible effect on others. That is, they're too strict about talking about any tiny amount of some animal product, might feed in something, or they're critical of anybody who eats any animal product. They think that's just as bad as somebody who eats all of the standard factory farm products that you can pick up in the supermarket. And so I advocate a kind of if you like, a somewhat relaxed veganism that is where essentially what you're trying to do is to say, I don't want to contribute in any substantial way to industries that exploit animals. And so I'm not going to just go to the supermarket and buy animal products. But if there's some tiny and commercially insignificant trace of something that I'm eating, and it's difficult or inconvenient, are purely substitute, that doesn't seem to be a terrible issue, and it maybe will make it easier for you to talk to your friends about how you provide for your food needs, you get when you go out to eat at restaurants, or when you're travelling in countries that don't have as much purely vegan food as they have in the United Kingdom. So you want to think about all of those things. But generally speaking, yes, I think it's an excellent thing to do. And of course, the other good thing about it is it doesn't have to be the only thing you can do. You can combine it with being active in various good causes or with donating some money. It's just another part of living an ethical life.
Great. And the next question is there a risk of neglecting worthwhile causes that are unfortunately not supported by the most effective of charities?
Well, there's that risk, certainly. I mean, I suppose the question is really saying that the effective altruism movement is very much into things where you measure the impact and you can actually get kind of cost-benefit valuation. How much does it cost to save a life, just someone's side? Or how can we measure the impact? How increasing the impact of people, increasing the income of people in extreme poverty by this or that intervention? Those are things we can measure. And there may be other good causes where it's much more difficult to measure the effect of what you're having. I've already talked about systemic change, which tends to be that sort of area. But even things that have only a very long-term effect, like education, are more difficult to measure, certainly. So there is that danger, and that's why you already mentioned the Open Philanthropy Project. It's casting its net more widely, it's looking at a whole range of things, and it's trying to find those that are reasonably promising and worth deeper investigation to see what they are going. So I think that to avoid the danger that you mentioned, yeah, we do need to be on guard against it, and we need to think about other strategies which are more difficult to measure, but where we might have some reason to think that they have a significant effect.
Thanks. So the top question, I can't really avoid, I guess there's a lot of philosophers in this room, is asking, would it be objectively bad if humanity was painlessly wiped out, e.g. by asteroid?
Okay, so I answered yes, that would be objectively bad. That's because I think that things like happiness, flourishing, a rich and full life, satisfaction, those are all good things. And they're not only good to someone who already exists, that is, obviously it's good if one of you in the room experiences a happy, fulfilling, rich life rather than a painful one. But I think it's also a good thing that there be such lives lived, that is, the happy, fulfilled ones. And so even if we imagine, let's say, some calamity that instantly fills every human being on the planet, I think that would be a bad thing because of the loss of those rich lives. Now, it occurs to me, speaking, the question could also have been talking about the impact that humans have on human animals on the planet, and for us, whether overall, I think that human beings, the contribution of human beings like to suffering, or happiness and suffering is positive. And my answer there would be that when you think about something caused by human extinction, you're not just looking at the state of the world today, where you might possibly argue that we cause so much suffering to animals that outweighs the net total of happiness humans have. Of course, somebody could be pessimistic and think that even for humans, life is not all good, because there are hundreds of millions of people in extreme poverty, various other forms of suffering, refugees and so on. But you have to look at the future if you're talking about extinction. I'm reasonably optimistic about that. That is, I think that as our technology improves, as our experience improves, we will get better at solving the problems that face us, and we will have better lives. I also hope that we'll live more ethically. We won't continue to poach fast and human animals. And I think the trajectory over the last century and millennium longer has been upward. Some people are surprised by that because they're looking at media headlines, one terrorist attack and then one civil war and then people killed in Aleppo and then an attack somewhere else. But if you look at the trends, both in the number of people who meet violent deaths, certainly the proportion of people who meet violent deaths, and trends like the reduction of poverty and the reduction of infant mortality, then the trends are positive, have been positive for quite a long time. So if you find that hard to believe, then read Pinker's excellent book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. I think he makes the case quite compellingly with a lot of data that that trajectory is upwards. And so if we can believe that and we believe it's likely to continue, then it is a disaster of enormous proportions if we cease to exist.
Thanks. So I've got two questions sort of related I'll ask together. Someone's asked, does this approach seem to be coldly reducing people to numbers? And then someone else has said, what about the desire to help loved ones and the desire to cultivate empathy?
Well, I would take that away coldly. I mean, yes, or even reduce. I mean, there are numbers of people, right? And I think it makes sense to think that to help a large number of people is better than to help a smaller number of people. I know there's this saying, I don't quite know whether it's in the Talmud or it's certainly some venerable Jewish rabbi said something like, he who saves a single individual saves the world. But I just don't think that's right. And I think we all feel that a much greater disaster has happened when, let's say there's a terrorist attack that kills hundreds of people, and there's a terrorist attack that kills only one person. I mean, they're both bad, but it's worse if terrorists succeed in killing a large number of people, or it's worse if Aleppo is bombed and thousands of people are killed, and if the bombs fall on a small village and kill only one person. So I think to deny that numbers are really not well-grounded. So that's the first part of the question. The second part was about should we be thinking about what about our loved ones, and should we be cultivating empathy? Yeah. Well, obviously any normal human being will think about their loved ones, as I do, and I could never claim that I have concern for children of strangers, of my own children. But I do think that I ought to act out of concern to strangers as well as out of concern to my children. And that's something that we wrestle with, I guess, or I wrestle with quite frequently. How much preference to give to my children, but that's, there's a point at which I just provide sufficiently to your children, adequately, and if you can do that, you must be benefiting them by providing them with more. So that's where I would take that one. There was also a question about empathy in it. Clearly, empathy is a good thing when it leads us to help other people, to broaden our circle of concern beyond those immediate family and friends you care about anyway. But empathy can be a distorting factor as well. If we empathise with a particular individual, where we've seen or maybe we've met, we might be led to give them much more weight than we give to others that we haven't met. And that can be a distorting factor. So sometimes there are aid organisations which work on that basis. They take that particular child, they say you can, in quotes, adopt this child in some way. That means you can send money each month to this child. And people feel that connection, and that's pulling up their empathy. But the money might do much more good if it was given to the entire community, not to the particular child. And some of these organisations now are aware of it. And in fact, although they feature a particular child, somewhere when you look at the text, it says your donation will go to so-and-so's community. And that's good, but if that were not the case, if we were just drawing to help one child when donation is much more effective to the whole community, then that's a misuse of the okay.
Thanks. So Lucas asked, considering the great diversity of moral intuitions that people have held over different times, places and cultures, how can you know that ours are correct?
Well, if by know you mean, as the term often implies, know with complete certainty, then the answer is I can't. I don't think there is complete certainty in philosophy, just as even in science, things that have been accepted for a long time can be overturned. But I do think that we have advanced in philosophy, including ethics. That is, that we have started to think more clearly and on a basis of better information about moral judgments, about how these moral judgments are formed. We know that there are various biases and distortions in many people's morals, but knowing that enables us to be on guard against them. And I think that can find something that is at least more likely to be true than the intuitions and judgments. If you just randomly selected various cultures for various time periods, you would get a lot of views that we would now reject. So I think having discussions with our friends and perhaps even if I put in a plug for philosophy, take philosophy courses and being stimulated to think about these questions in a deeper way with other people who thought about it for a long time or who read the work of others, helps us to avoid some of the errors that other people make. And even if we're not going to end up certain that we're right, I think we're going to end up less likely to be seriously wrong than if we hadn't thought about these things in that way.
Great. We've got a comment on an earlier question. I guess this was the earning to give question. Someone said, about working for a company that causes harm, you said, if you don't take the job, someone else will. What about meat? If you don't eat it, someone else will.
Well, I'm not sure that that's true. If that were true, I would worry about that. But at least if you're living in a country where most people who want to eat meat can afford to eat it, so if I don't eat this meat, someone else is going to eat twice as much meat as we would otherwise, and eat my share as well as theirs. I don't see that. The amount of meat that is produced, the number of animals who are put through factory farms, is going to be related in some way to the demand for the meat. If the demand for the product falls, then the supply of the product falls. We've seen that happening in various ways. You could imagine someone saying about replacing draft horses with tractors, right? Let's say somebody was saying, look, I think it's cruel to have draft horses doing heavy loads. Often get whipped. You've read Black Beauty, the novel about in the sort of first person by a London horse, I guess 100 or 100 and something years ago. You'll see that there was a lot of cruelty involved. So if somebody said, well, I'm going to replace that with a car or a tractor or a truck or whatever it might be, and someone else had said, well, if you don't use those horses, someone else is going to abuse them. That's just not true. I mean, the outcome today is that there are far fewer working horses in this way, horses pulling heavy loads and so on, than there were, because we moved from, not because so much of anti-cruelty, of course, but because we moved from to the use of internal combustion. So similarly, if demand for plant-based food increases, then more plant-based foods are going to be produced, and less meat will be produced. So I don't agree with what else is going to be.
I think Will McCaskill showed something like for every egg you don't eat, 0.8 fewer eggs will be produced or something like this, so that you not eating an egg will actually lead to fewer eggs.
In some ways, I guess that's very true. Or the price will drop a little and more people will come into the market because it drops a little, but it's not the demand is not so elastic that whenever the price drops, it just simply makes up for the same demand.
So I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. So someone has asked, do you feel that donating to a particular charity because of personal reasons, i.e. local charities, can ever be morally justified?
Ever is a big word. I mean, clearly it can be if you know that this charity is really doing good work, and you might feel that even if it's not doing as much good per pound that you're donating as sent to a highly effective charity work in a developing country, you might think, I've got a high degree of confidence that it is doing good, perhaps higher than I can have even with a well-checked out charity working elsewhere. So that might be one reason why you might support a local charity. But it's given the difference between the amount of good you can do in developing countries compared to local, usually that's fine. Anything that is even close to being comparable. The other thing is you might want to have connections with the people that the organisation is helping, and you might feel that this is, if you like, an important part of your life, to feel involved in the community in which you live. And I certainly think, I don't object to that. I just think you should think of it in a different category from the what you're doing for development. Effective altruism ought to be a part of your life, and ought to be within that part of your life, I think, doing as much good as you can with the resources you have. If it's also important to be connected with your local community in that way, then think of that as something that, in a way, you're spending on yourself. I mean, you're not entirely spending on yourself. It's not like going out and buying the latest iPhone because you'd rather have the latest model than the previous model, which needs pretty well, because it is doing some other good too. But still think of it as indulging yourself in some way, or part of your spending, but not necessarily part that you want to set aside for effective altruism.
Thanks. So just before our final question, I'll just point out to the audience that there should be some feedback forms and pens on your tables. We really like data at Giving What We Can in 8,000 hours, so we'd really appreciate if you could just fill them in. You can do them completely anonymously if you want to. So the final question is staring me in the face. Peter, I think it's quite a difficult one to end on. Say you have a nasty form of cancer and it costs you $50,000 per month to keep yourself alive. Should you prioritize yourself or save thousands of other lives?
Well, actually not me. This is not something that the National Health Service or my health insurance is going to pay for. Is that right? It's actually costing me that money, but I guess we have to assume.
That's what it seems to suggest, yeah.
Yeah, right. This is one of those shoulds where you might say, just assume that you're just an ordinary person. You're not a scientist about to discover some miraculous new way of feeding the world or anything like that. Then it might well be that what you should do is to donate that money to an effective charity, to the executive of your will donates it to an effective charity. But nobody is going to blame you, I think. If your life is at stake, nobody is going to blame you for saying, first I'm going to preserve my life, and then I'm going to donate to a charity while I can spare after I preserve my life. So this is a situation where I would say there's a difference between what we might say in some purely theoretical sense, or our understanding of ethics, what you ought to do, and there's a difference in what we criticize you for doing or blame you for doing. And that's a problem that exists in any kind of consequentialist ethics, I think, that these things become apart. So we could understand why we do that. We would not see that as a reason why we think you're a bad person. Yeah, perhaps it's not the purely best thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Peter. I think we should give Peter Singer a big round of applause.
Thanks very much. I'm glad the technology worked. Thanks to the organisers for setting this up. It's good to have the chance to speak to you. And I hope you'll continue to think about these issues and go on to make effective altruism a part of your life.
Thank you very much. Bye.